For the time we've been doing this, little intro note, I know that some people that have seen these tapes and been around some of this, that have found it interesting, found it to be useful in some strange way, still stay concerned, sometimes expressed and sometimes not, but concerned that they do not understand it. And it might be useful for me just to point out that it's not that you can't understand it, it's not that you shouldn't understand it, but the idea that is quite predictable, quite ordinary, and quite necessary at the routine intellectual level, that how can you be enjoying something and not understand it? Well, at least anything beyond the physical level, beyond screwing or eating or taking a nap, running, standing on your head, but something that seems to be intangible, like an intellectual something or other, that it is natural to feel, well, I seem to be enjoying it, and I find it interesting, but, gee, I don't understand it. I'm not saying don't try, and I'm not saying also that trying to literally, specifically understand just the words that's going on here, that does not mean that that is the real heart, or that that is the alpha and omega, that that is the more manifold raison d'etre of what this is and why you enjoy it. And so it doesn't mean that you shouldn't try and to have something happen in your own intellect regarding this. But why be forget the rhetorical. Don't be concerned. If you find this interesting, if you find it enjoyable, don't let the idea of, well, I don't understand it. Just consider from a more rebellious standpoint how ridiculous that is. Don't, and I know many of you mean well, not just to me, if you wrote me, but to yourself, that, well, I shouldn't perhaps be enjoying this the way I am because I obviously don't understand everything he's saying, and therefore I assume you feel like in some way that maybe you're cheating. How can I be enjoying this and even feeling like it's benefiting me when if suddenly he said, all right, pop quiz, I would fail. That I would be found out and I'd be driven from the temple and say, all right, everybody who failed this, all of you who failed, raise your hand, you start. Now, if you who have your hands up, who's been actually enjoying this and thought you were getting something out of it anyway? And there you are with your hand up and you don't know what to do with your hand. And then we say, well, that's terrible. Think how ridiculous that is. But I repeat one more time, it does not mean that you should not be, if you're interested in this anyway, I shouldn't not really have to engage in any kind of great encouragement. It is not that there is no intellectual new areas that to which this might spur you on. But don't be concerned over the fact of, well, I just don't know whether I should press on with this because I just tell you the truth, I don't really understand some, any, all of what you're talking about. I mean, if you're going to write me a note like that or send it to me by telepathy, I'm going to have to tell you, if it makes you feel any better, you are not going to puncture a virgin. If you're afraid that you're going to be the first person who ever said, boy, I enjoy this, but gee, I don't think I understand it. I mean, don't let that get you. Unless you're going to let it get you, and then, hell, you're just going to let it get you then. And I'll send Henry over to your house to sing. That was really no comment. The man can sing better than I can. Here we go. I was going to tell you a myth, a little story that I brought in from far, far away, since everybody likes to hear that. Far, far away. And if you don't like that, a long, long time ago. Or combination, a myth from a long, long time ago that very few people ever heard. How's that? Either that or I made it up this afternoon. Here is the story. Here is the story. There is a king who has been waging an extended and dear, in the British sense, an expensive war And one of his ministers comes to him. And it's getting expensive. Consider the myth brought up to date, in case I did make it up this afternoon. And it is truly getting expensive, which you don't have to worry about anti-ballistic rockets nowadays that cost $1 million. King Henry, people before him went through the same thing. That's where taxation came from, of those of you that like history. A minister came to the king and says, well, how about this? The soldiers out here are always usually not the regal upper class, those out there in the cavalry, in the infantry. Perhaps you should make the soldiers aware, the warriors, make them aware of the actual cost of the ordinances. So that they wouldn't just, how soldiers are. They're always kids on top of that. Young teenage males. Catch them when their hormones are hot. Make great killers. Get them away from women. And, in case you never thought about it, that's how the states of Alabama, Mississippi, and parts of Georgia got started. But that's another story. And, of course, all of Italy. But no, don't write me. Well, like parts of Greece, if we're going to start that. But they had their own version. So one of these ministers says, here's what we should do. They're out there and they're just fooling around, and every time they fire off one of these crossbows or they send off one of these rockets, it's costing 1,000,000 copals. Why don't we tell them, make them aware of the fact? And the king went. And it only took him a few seconds, and he thought, no, because he entertained it first, and maybe that's cut down expenses to tell them how much the ammo. And the king thought, no. Because if you get the troops worried about the price of ammunition, they will never fire off the necessary rounds. Think about it. At first, it could sound to be a tremendously good idea, whether we were talking about something going on in the 1000s or right today, to tell people out there. I want to take the idiomatic, if not symbolic, basis hard enough for you to hear it, that it is always this sort of thing. Once you think about it, it can apparently have one very distinct message, if this happened out in real life, that would have some pragmatic significance and would seem to point in one particular way, that this would be, if it was going to be done, thought about, said, pursued, it would be done this way. That is, even if it was King Henry, it's all a matter of relative activities and bows and arrows, or if it were now, and those out there doing this work are normally of the less educated, known in King Henry's time and nowadays behind closed doors, that those out doing the fighting are still cannon fodder. And so you have guys out there, and they've been trained enough they can mash a button, they fire off a rocket, and the son of a bitch cost $1 million. And they got there and fool around. Well, maybe not like kids throwing firecrackers, but one of the guys will say, ooh, and they're getting frightened, not making fun of it. And people, two camps engaged in combat, conflict, and one of them says, wait, I hear something coming. Maybe they are coming over the hill. We better fire off one of these. They told us, they can't let them get through here or we're finished. So at first this minister says, here's what we should do, is go tell them. They can understand that's a lot of money, but go down there, call them all in, or draw up something and show them how many 6-packs of beer one of these rockets costs. And you have guys out here with a 10th grade education. They've trained them as good as possible, but they're sitting there and watching all the radar and everything. They got their finger, but all they got to do is mash one of these things, and they're winning $1 million. Whether it's wasted or not, once it's shot, you can't call a rocket back or go catch it in the net and say, well, we'll save it till tomorrow. We should go tell those guys that. And of course, you can even go farther and say, all right, you could do this. You could tell them, not only does it cost that, we want you to do your job, but if we find out, if you fire off a rocket, if you fire off one of these $1 million babies, and we can look back later, and we're recording everything's going on, and we see that there was based upon what we've trained you to do, and we see that there was no rational basis for you doing that, that's going to come out of your pocket some way, or we're going to prosecute you. We're going to do something. All right, at first that could sound as though that would be very rational. Is we want to win the war, of course. But, we could win the war and bankrupt the country. We cannot have people just, firing off bows and arrows and just getting up there on the ramparts and pouring off boiling oil like boiling oil grows on trees. That costs money. So at first you might think, well, that would be an enlightened, a more rational way to conduct some affairs, at least within the midst of what city people, of course, consider to be a maelstrom of irrationality, warfare, but to at least keep from bankrupting the country is let people know. But then think about it. It could not be done. If you made them get concerned over the cost of ammo, then when shots needed to be fired, the necessary rounds to prevail would never get fired. There are sort of oblique versions of this, by the way, for those of you that want to think about it. It's in the law, is generally known as the doctrine of sovereign immunity, and it's been chipped away a little bit, but in our day and time, it is the way it's normally put is you can't sue the state, you can't sue the king, you can't sue your local government, because the prevailing theory, the original theory was, for instance, the police, fire departments. If it was known that a fire truck, if it hits you on the way to a fire, that you have as much right to sue them as you did just a drunken driver. And of course, if you once started that in the Western world, the theory of employer and employee, then you could start holding the guy driving the fire truck responsible. And if they had to worry, the alarm goes off and it shows where the fire is, and they got to get in the fire truck, and they're going to drive through traffic and try to do 100 miles an hour and go put out a fire and save lives, or police go somewhere, but they've got to think, wait a minute, we got to watch it. Now, I just bought a new house, thanks to the driver, thanks to the cop. And if I go out there and I'm trying to save somebody's life, I'd like to save their life, that's my job, but I'm going to watch it. And they'd be so cautious that the necessary rounds would never get fired. There used to be another one that's been chipped away some too, was the legal theory of the Good Samaritan doctrine. That in case of emergencies, if a physician, for instance, came upon a man hurt by the highway and you attempted to treat him under those kind of emergency, adverse conditions, that you could not be sued, you could not be held legally responsible on the doctrine on the basis of any malpractice. That if there you were walking along and you were a physician and you found somebody there dangerously injured and you attempted to treat him and all you had with you was a church key, a pocket knife and some rubber bands, and you had to spit on him, but you did your best to save him, and later his family said, well, no reasonable doctor would have tried to help this man on the basis of not having any equipment or no operating room. And the physicians go, well, yeah, you're right, but he was going to die anyway. I gave him my best shot. No, that won't do. You shouldn't have done that. Plus the old man's dead, and they figure if a physician got some money, we'll sue him anyway. So years ago, that was. All of this, although it's not looked at, of course, in that manner, but I'm just showing you that there is a kind of very imprecise basis already is in the framework of man's nervous system. But it is not looked at in the way, of course, I'm going to try and drag this even through the metaphorical mud into the great sunlight of symbolism. Jesus, write that down. Well, even I was impressed. But God, am I easily impressed. And I'm saying me metaphorically. I didn't mean me personally. All right, trying to get down closer to the specifics. Let me put it collaterally. So we're doing this gradually, slipping up on the MFs. I don't know how many of you enjoy Maynard Ferguson's music. Collaterally, it goes like this. The first collateral we could put is if underlings are worried and influenced by the cost, they will always remain underlings. Now, as JB would put it even more subtly. That used to be one of his steps before he had his face fixed. Put it a little more personally. Remember, we're now into if underlings had to worry about the cost and be influenced by the cost, they will always remain underlings. Now let's try this. If you are your mental troopers, your own neural underlings, if you remain concerned over the cost of abandoning, over destroying, take that, abandoning / destroying, all of your, or any old ordinances, the old ammunition that you already have, old ideas, established ordinances, the facts. If you're concerned over the cost of firing those things off, shooting them off just out into the sand, out into the darkness, abandoning them, blowing them up, if you're concerned over that, you will never engage in the kind of fearless, nonchalant exploration necessary for a revolution. You will not. A crude, everyday, but a very crude, tangible example of this is how life wires up quite ordinary people. Yes, I smell a few. Quite ordinary people, so that they will say things such as, where they will claim that they would be living quite different lives were it not for the fact that their mama's still alive and what she might think. You know, if they became like a transsexual body and fender man with a green mohawk. You are dealing, now, as always, this is quite necessary, and it's not a social commentary, and it's certainly not a critique of ordinary affairs in the city. But you understand, if cost becomes the object of anything, if cost ever becomes an object, then it will be the object. There is no way out of it. It is part of the polarized basis of energy. Thus, if your reason for not engaging in combat, of making a move, has to do with the cost, has to do with, how about the physician? That there you are in an emergency situation, or in a situation that you might be able to do yourself some good. Forget about this another guy laying there in the road, that you might be able to do some good, and yet you have got to be concerned over the possible consequences. Like the physician, well, if I treat this guy and it doesn't work out, I could be sued. Or I'm driving a police car and I'm trying to help somebody, but if I have a wreck on the way, I could live to regret it. If you've got to be concerned, if you will be concerned at all over the possible cost, over the ramifications, over the liabilities, what would my mother think? What will she think? I don't know, will she find out? Well, no, she won't find out, she's dead. But what would she think? Now, I picked out an easy one to start with, because the harder one is, what would I think? Be sure, of course, and get that off the tape. It's what would my mama think? What would my minister? What would my rabbi? What would my dear departed? You are still talking about from a revolutionist view, not any proper concern that you might have over the sensibilities of your family, but you are still being concerned over the cost of ammo. I will go back to the beginning, since a lot of you gave a hearty chuckle. You have got to be able to understand that as rational, and in fact almost as enlightened as the idea sounds in the beginning, that an expensive war could be, or the expense of an extended war could at least be partially abated if you made those involved, the soldiers, aware of the cost of the ordinances. You think, well, yeah. But if you can think, well, yeah, just one more second, if you can think just a little plainly, no, you cannot have someone engaged in a serious operation. That's why I picked out combat. You cannot have them in any way concerned over the possible cost. For them to hesitate 1 second that, well, if I mash this and I'm wrong, and I'm making $72.50 a month, the king will be docking me, let's say 3/4 of my salary, for like 7,000 years. And if you hesitate 1 second, you understand you could be done for. Or if the fire truck on the way to save your house, and you find out that he pulled in this big intersection, and he slowed for a second, and then something happened. Like when he slowed for a second, the fire engine stalled, and he couldn't get it back cranked. You cannot operate on that kind of basis if you are having any concern over the cost. It will get time without any doubt for those necessary rounds to be fired, and if you have people out in the trenches, you have those actively involved worrying at all about the cost of ammo, you cannot hesitate. But what happens here? At the ordinary level, of course, for those of you at the ordinary level, I want to hear about the ordinary level, and I don't know why you do unless it's me talking to fish about water, and we've already been through preaching to the converted. I was going to do bubble, bubble, gurgle, gurgle. See, like a fish Billy Graham or something. Billy Graham in a carp suit. The Pope in a flounder robe. I don't know. And yet, what I started to say at the ordinary level, of course, is what we're describing tonight is hesitation, worry about the cost, and what will my mama think. All of that is just as American as white bread. It is just as necessary as water to a fish. But it's not a social criticism, and it's not that you should be insouciant toward the feelings of your family, and blah, 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 blah. So everyone's supposed to be concerned. Everyone's supposed to be concerned about the cost. But do you understand? Do you get some glimpse, at least in a metaphorical way, that if this kind of activity is going to be running collaterally with a concern over what's this going to cost, although that's not the terms intellect would use in this kind of attempt or even in a thinking, dreaming about this kind of undertaking. But it is still continually, as energy must do. That is why energy is polarized at this level. It is weighing the cost, because everything that's subtracted from the vanilla end of the magnet is added to the chocolate. And of course, those at the vanilla end think, Jesus, somebody done stole my flavor. That is, the positive end thinks it's lost. You understand? That is, somebody over in the west side of the closet suddenly thinks my pocket's been picked, and it's somebody over on the other side of the closet got it, without the ability to realize it's all still in the closet. It's all still here in Bastard and Robbins. At one time, they dish it out with the right hand with vanilla, and then the left hand with chocolate. See, I knew I could lose you. It's the same stuff. You are being concerned over the cost. At a very, very basic, crude level, if somebody's ordinary intelligence was hearing some of this and everything else still being equal, etc., then they might be able to perceive this, that if they were not concerned over the cost, it would be dangerously close to driving yourself nuts, that you could fly apart cerebrally, that your brain could explode, or at least get real wishy-washy, I think is the neurological term nowadays. You could get waxy buildup or untoward stains right under the rim of your cerebral toilet bowl. Anyway, something bad would happen if an ordinary person in some way could hear some of this. And again, if everything else being equal, that is, they could do what they could do and still not do anything else, or do something else while still not being able to do what they can do, then an ordinary person could say, well, wait a minute, you're just saying to try and have new ideas or to have some new perception or new understanding in life. Yeah. You're just kind of saying that you just have to go, oh, what the hell, I'll just believe anything. No, but see, I can speak for them. That was sort of what they'd come up with. Or you're just saying, instead of thinking, well, life should be lived in a certain way, or people should be decent, you should take a shower and get a good haircut, And anytime you go somewhere important around important people, be sure and wear a shirt and tie. And wear clean underwear, of course. And write your mama. You're just saying to take all that stuff and suddenly make your brain, whatever part of your nervous system you're trying to include in this kind of silliness, and just make it go, never mind all that. See, I know how they would say that, but that's not really it. But see, that's about the best they could come up with. That you do have to have some concern over the cost. They're trying to now respond to me and say, well, the cost is almost what you're saying, if I hear you correctly. Well, you don't, but go ahead. If I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that just screw the cost, but what you're saying is screw sanity. To just turn your mind loose and don't worry about all the old things you thought. As if somebody could do that. It's part of the humor for those of you who look for humor in that. Is them saying, no, I'm not going to do that, as if they could. No, because that would be dangerous. If I could suddenly let go, I've had that thing before, back when I used to take drugs back in the 60s. I've had the thing before that I was just kind of like a cat hanging on the edge of a penthouse. And my fingers about to, that's why I had to quit drugs. That's why I had to quit drinking. Because I used to feel like, one more toke, if I dropped another little button or something, I'm afraid that I would just go away and I wouldn't come back. So, no, because all you're talking about is kind of doing that without drugs and stuff. As if they could do that. Now we're back to a revolutionist trying to undertake this kind of neural rebellion and exploration somewhere else. You will not go somewhere else if you ponder the cost. One other notation, this is known as NOO, or NOTO if you want to include articles. Notation of the obvious. Noto. And that is that someone has already made the enlisted men aware of the cost of bullets. You want to go through that again? Maybe I didn't do enough business with it. Besides just what I've said, I got to tell you the truth. Somebody's already made the troops aware of the cost of bullets. Well, you got a mama, don't you? You live in a society, don't you? You've had thoughts before that there is a God, or else you had a thought that there is no God, or that life is good, or that life is bad. Of course, you need to find that those guys are going to take that on the road. Things do look better. They may be gone. You have to catch up with them in Buffalo. Okay, that is, since I'm having to translate myself. You got problems when you hear somebody translating. If you had a translator, if we move this into like a potentate, or as a potato from a foreign country, or somebody at the UN, and they're speaking, and they got a translator, and you're listening to somebody speaking a foreign language, and then a translator speaking your language, and you're having more trouble with the translator than you do the language you don't know. Hey, don't know why I thought to say that, but here we go. I was going to translate myself. Gee, we can hardly wait. I bet this will clear that up. Well, it's more a matter of that will clear this up. See, instead of this will clear that up. Huh? See, if you get those small things confused, little small things, then a lot of times you'll look around later and you think, I've got a whole bunch of small things confused. The translation I was going to do, you recall just what I said, that little piece of somebody, I'm going to have to go ahead and tell you, somebody has already clued in, somebody's already spilled the beans and told the troops, the enlisted men, the peons, the factual center. Somebody's already told them the cost of bullets. That is, here was going to be my translation, that is that there is more operational necessities involved in secondary peer, family, social, religious pressure than ever meets the polarized eye. Now, by many quite sane and necessary and unassailable views of ordinary life, peer pressure. Many times a great case is made for that. Other times just peer pressure extended almost institutionally into the pressure of a whole society, or part of, from one view, the purpose of religions. The great religions, when they were serving even more nationalistic purposes, when you had so many small city-states and little kings constantly involved, it was the first sort of attempt to create nationalism, to bring people together. So all the way from the peer pressure of, they blame it on teenagers, or they normally use it in that sense, but what will my friends think, all the way from that to the wider sense of what will society think, or to the widest sense, even with ordinary people, is they do what they do, but they don't know what it is making them do it. If you ask them, they go, well, it's because of what? Yes. It's because of what? Yes. It's because of what they'll think. No. There is more to that. There is more operational necessity beyond the 3D limit to everything from peer pressure to religious pressure to family concerns than any polarized mind will ever perceive. That being true, as it always is, at that level, there is no way out. You cannot rationalize your way out. An ordinary person can't say, well, you're right. Now that you point that out, I can't live the rest of my life worried about what my mama thinks. And then El Soto, they even say, especially since she died in 68, yes, I'll just go ahead. I'll change my life. There is more, because they cannot talk their way out of it. Not that they should. They can talk about talking their way out. They can talk about the difficulty of doing so and then perhaps get on the Donahue show. But they cannot actually do it. They can turn the magnet around, or they can take the cone and turn it upside down and think, well, it's chocolate after all, whereas it was vanilla. But they cannot make a change. All the things known as peer pressure, all the things known as the pressures of society, everything known as the intangible social weight that makes me live an uptight, upright life. Anything you can come up with, there is an operational validity that the polarized mind can never come to grips with. And it is still, if you haven't noticed, it is still a matter of the troops already being made aware of the cost of ammo. Therefore, everyone hesitates to shoot, especially at critical times. That this one guy that we mentioned earlier, we didn't name him, but this guy that wanted to cease being an ordinary Joe and wanted to become a cross-dressing automobile mechanic, and the time comes that he might have lived out this admirable dream, and it came time to shoot, and something happened. I don't know, I suddenly thought, if my mama was alive, what she'd say. Or what my friends are going to say. They'll probably throw me off the bowling team. What the police might say. And they say, pardon me, miss, you're driving awfully fast. Plus, that's some beard you got there. I'm being funny, I think. It's still back to this. The time comes in everyone's life, it's just the way things are arranged. It's not psychological, it's not karmatic, but things are arranged with ordinary people that if there were auspicious, propitious times wherein somebody might be able to fire off a round and make some change here, or in their life they'd think, but here, they've already been clued in that these bastards cost money. No. And somebody's going to have to answer for $500,000 or 75 cents, whatever it is. They have already been made aware of the fact that ammo costs money. Bullets do not grow on trees. They come from the king. And somebody's got to answer. And of course, with bullets, you can replace that with all sorts of things. Opinions, ideas, attitudes, schematic patterns of thought, and you can replace king with family, God, life, society, humane attitudes, rational approaches. And of course, the great one that nobody can do is, I can't do this, and I've got no idea why. That's the kind of person that maybe someday I could say, what are you going to say next? And they might finally not even answer. But I won't hold my breath speaking metaphorically. And I'm saying me as a metaphor. Can you tie to something else a little prior note? Can you tie all this? It was, well, I'll repeat it for those of you who didn't hear it. I'm not sure I did. That's why I'm glad to repeat some of this, because oftentimes I hear it and I realize, well, Jesus, I missed that the first time around. It had to do with the ordinary concept of the impossible. And what happens if a real revolutionist made a continual assault, attempted to do something impossible, and for real revolutionists to do it, you also have got to know, to attempt the impossible, you cannot have any concern over the cost. That is, the odds. That is, because it's already been labeled, and perhaps you accept it, that to attempt to do this is impossible. Then that's the cost. Then for a revolutionist to do it, to attempt it, you can't have any concern over the cost. And then, I would point out that to do that has an effect upon the revolutionist's own concept, if not other things, but concept of impossible, because it's no longer some sort of either on and off continuous strip of neon that spells out impossible. It then becomes a matter more like that the concept, the word impossible, is spelled out in separate incandescent bulbs. That rather than it being an apparent all or nothing, that is impossible to the ordinary mind, to the revolutionist approach it becomes more incremental. Would you see what that would do to the cost? Would you see what that would do to a supremely reasonable, which would be a revolutionist, to a supremely reasonable person's conception of what the cost is? Well, what is impossible to the ordinary mind? I mean, impossible, you want something unconditional? It's not the only word, but, I mean, we're talking about unconditional. If you say something is impossible, you don't say, well, that's kind of impossible. But to say something's impossible, we're talking about the supreme digital dynamic. We're talking about the ultimate on and off. Well, you can't do that, sir. It's impossible. Did you say impossible? Yes. Case closed. It is like being writ in a continuous, what I meant by a continuous strip of neon, to make a comparison, is the thing's either on or off. And don't be right, man. I know that sometimes you can wire up neon and part of the letters go out of a sign. But what the hell? Metaphors are just metaphors. Plus, they're a lot better than neon. Or they're cheaper, they might be better. But the idea of impossible is like a supreme all or nothing. Is that Cole Porter? All or nothing? I'm not going to sing. But impossible then is the ultimate on-off, all or nothing. And the concept of impossible is an established, continuous, as much as ordinary intellect deals with such things, it is continuous. Either you hear it's impossible and you accept it. It may be widely accepted. It may be the only rational response to whatever it is that you might be thinking to undertake. To hear it's impossible, whether you thought you heard out there or whether it seemed to be in here. Impossible. Enough said. Except, instead of it being all or nothing, what if there is a way to approach? And it's even beyond the approach. What if you do it in such a way that it changes, that the approach itself becomes an effect upon the concept? So it is no longer a seamless, where it's no longer an all or nothing. There's no longer this one strip of neon spelling out impossible. It's either on or off. It becomes like, as you know, that they used to use in olden times, separate bulbs, incandescent little bulbs to spell out a word. And that operates incrementally. Part of it can go out and you can still make out the word. Enough can go out and you can not make out the word. Enough go out and you look at it and think, that doesn't say impossible. That says, eat my shorts. I would suggest that an intellectual revolutionist, which is the only kind of interest, could not undertake any sort of exploration, would not be engaging in any skirmishes while considering any ordinary cost or outcomes. Put another way, if he is, then what he's doing is no real exploration. What he's thinking about, what he's attempting to study, figure out, is not radical, it is not new, he is not actually, in the sense we've been explaining it, talking about, he is not actually thinking. All he is doing is ruminating over the cost of the ammo. And what passes in the ordinary world for being extended forays of intellectual travel is simply people considering the cost. Whereas at the ordinary level, you might say that the more timid, the less intellectually sportsmen in the city are aware of the cost and they simply forget about it. But what passes at that level, which is just relative, but I pointed out because it does have some significance, what passes for being extraordinarily insightful, perhaps on the verge of being a mystic or a bus driver in the city, is to state the cost. And not just to ignore it, but to say, and begin to babble on, especially poetically, about the potential cost for doing such and such, for thinking such and such. I could start pointing out examples historically, literarily, socially, but you're surrounded by them. That very thing. That sounds like that there are notations, always from the past, of course, but notations, records somewhere of men having great insight or being given great insight by outside cosmic forces. That there is something significant and great about the Talmud, the Quran, or Shakespeare as opposed to Batman, comic books, or the National Lampoon, and everybody agrees, let's say. But what is the difference in classical or spiritual or enlightened, insightful literature, thought, as opposed to that which is not? That which is not is comparable, to use what we're talking about tonight, would be comparable to the troops, the intellectual troops, being, since they already are, aware of the cost of ammo, and they're almost frozen. They're afraid to shoot. What passes for in the city? High literature. Grand opera as opposed to Gilbert, and you know who. I promised I wouldn't say his name. The difference, instead of the troops just being frozen, the neurological troopers being so afraid that, what passes then for higher, insightful literature, thought, etc., is simply this. Those who still can't fire, but they discuss novels, epic poetry, all sorts of things, religious literature, on the basis of what their cost would be. And those that are kind of milling around between the two that would go buy books or become religious, they go, well, there's a difference. These people over here, this guy, we're talking about a man who, we're not talking about some phony baloney cartoonist that's drawing for Mad Magazine. This guy is a prophet. This guy is a genius. And all he's pointing out is, which everybody knows, but the rest of them don't talk about it. They just gave up. These people have also given up in a sense, but they talk about, I suspect it's up to some of us to do the kind of intellectual legwork for all of us. No offense to you. No offense to you lower classes. But I think it should be pointed out, because I'm one of the few who see it, the extreme, and I mean extreme, consequences of just casually, irresponsibly, irrationally, illegally, irreligiously shooting off your guns. Thank you, thank you. They give the man a degree. They put his bust up, wherever they put people's bust. It is in no wise, an exploration is in no wise a rebellion of the intellect, because if, I'll repeat for the night, if you want a theorem to take with you from the funny place, you're engaged in no exploration, you're engaged in no form of neural revolution if you have, which you do naturally, I mean, you just got to face that. Your troops and everybody else has already been told. But if you are still operating on the basis of having any concern over the cost of ammo, then you cannot fire. You will not fire, you will not shoot at the necessary time. There is one more example that repeated all throughout history and all over the world. I guess in your lifetime, most people attribute it to fortune cookies. But it's a great old truism from the city that goes like this. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with one small step. Thank you, unquote. The ordinary intellect takes this as being a kind of proverbial commentary that says, no matter how daunting, damn near impossible, how harsh may appear to be the task at hand, the journey of 1,000 miles, that you at least should go ahead and at least make what appears to be some initial effort. Now, I know I sort of laid that on a little thick. It doesn't mean that everyone that responds to that takes it in a sarcastic manner. I was just trying to get you to see within that is the full range in the city of how people, no matter how intellectual, no matter how addicted they may be to one-liners, the whole idea, though, that saying, all right, a journey of 1,000 miles, we're talking about, many steps, and here you go, and you think, I got to walk 1,000 miles, and it says, but it begins, even 10,000, but let's be reasonable. That journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. That is, well, all right, here it is. We're talking about a formidable, for those of you that like it formidably, a formidable task at hand. But, you can't just stay in here and be frozen and worry about what's going to happen. You've got to go ahead, take a step. And it even seems as though it's a kind of encouragement that, well, you got to start somewhere, and one step is the only way you can begin even a journey of 1,000 miles. But may I suggest to you that there is a possible revolutionist translation of this. I figured he was going to say that. And it would be more like this, that there is no difference between 1,000 miles and one step. And the cost and effort involved between 1,000 miles or one step, the cost. The cost is all the same, whether it's 1,000 miles or one step once you leave 3Dville. That, I'm suggesting, is the more manifold basis of the idea. And the idea is great. The idea is, in another sense, as you should be able to see by now, this and many other examples, but you could see that idea as being a verbal germ of all religions, of all basis of all societies, the whole idea of progress. It's not the only one, but that's one. And it is seen as being a kind of, you can look at it as either being a comment on the inevitable, that, well, if you're going to have to do it, go ahead and just at least make a step. Maybe you'll die if we have to go any further. Or maybe they'll say, all right, since you took a step, you don't actually have to go 1,000 miles like we said. We're just checking you. You know, who knows, but you got to do something. If they say you got to go on a journey 1,000 miles, you cannot sit there the rest of your life thinking, Jesus, I cannot walk 1,000 miles. There's no way. Bad arches running my family. You know, you can do all that, but if life says you got to walk, you're going on a journey for 1,000 miles, 67 years, whatever it is, you're going to go. You go, oh no, you can't sit there and do it forever. So you can take it as being a comment like the inevitable. Well, go ahead and at least make a step, and maybe you'll be lucky enough that life will say, just checking. Now you don't have to do it, or maybe you'll be lucky enough that you'll die. Your first step, you fall over and die. You can see it as being that kind of comment on the inevitable, or you could see it if you think there's any difference. You could see it as a kind of encouragement, like, well, you can't worry about that. No matter how intelligent you are, you can have, by God, a college degree, clean underwear, a good car. But if you're going to have to go on a journey 1,000 miles, it doesn't matter all that. You, like everybody else, are going to have to do what? Take that first step. So go ahead. You're right. I just never looked at it that way. Thank God I know philosophical people like you. Well, it's one of the benefits of being in the fortune cookie business. All right, so somewhere in there you can take that this is a worldwide truism, that it vibrates, it strikes many people. I may have mucked it up for your ordinary perception now, that you'll never be able to eat another cookie and get whatever you used to get. But a journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. Notice the basis I picked out that many of you already responded to that would never be seen is from a revolutionist view. Beyond the vibrations, beyond the magnetic necessities of polarized thinking, which produces such ideas as that anyway, that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. What the ordinary intellect would never see because it couldn't use it. But conversely, for you to be able to use such as this, you've got to see such as this. You've got to see beyond the polarized version and realize this. We're talking about they made it up in the city. 1,000-mile journey, one thing, and one step. That's about as far removed from each other. You know, one step is one step. And we do not have enough tape, or I'm not interested, to show you what a 1,000-mile walk is. But you do, I think you will agree, for the sake of the debate, that there is a difference between a 1,000-mile walk and one step. Except, to the revolutionist, there is no difference. It's not metaphysical. There is no difference in cost. Because if you are not any longer operating on the basis that you have to calculate and you have to be concerned over the cost of ammo, what the hell difference does it make? Literally. There is no difference. It does not correspond to the way your energy works here that, all right, you're faced with a 1,000-mile journey. Okay, 1,000-mile walk. All right, got it. Or, listen, you're going to have to take a step. I'm talking about a full step. If there's any calculation about, wait a minute, which at any ordinary level there is, the cost between one step and walking a friggin' 1,000 miles, I mean, no one but an idiot would say that you shouldn't calculate the cost. It's inevitable. You got to calculate the cost. There's no difference. Once you leave, of course, now you understand, we're not talking about feats. For those of you who graduated from the University of Tennessee, we're not talking about feats, not physical feats. We're talking about this. And there is no difference. There is no difference in cost between whether you're going 1,000 miles or whether you're going one step. Because if you're going to abandon old ordinance, old ideas, the old building site of the neural paradigm in you, there is no cost. Or if there is a cost, it's all the same. It doesn't matter whether you take a step away or whether you go 1,000 miles away. You abandon it. If you go somewhere else, there is no difference. Therefore, there is no way to ponder the cost. Because if there is a cost, it's all the same. Or looked at another way, once you move, there is no cost. And so it doesn't matter which way you moved. It doesn't matter whether you took a step or whether you went 1,000 miles. Once you get out of 3Dville, once you can get past the city limits, once you get away from the limits of polarized thinking, there is no cost. It doesn't matter anymore. Somebody just gave me the peace sign. Well, wait a minute. Somebody that just gave me the peace sign, somebody either was trying to tell me how much time is left on the tape, or else someone was trying to give an embellished international signal, I assume, showing their attitude toward the show tonight. But be that as it may, I guess we'll conclude now, and thank you for watching again another episode of the show that asks the question,